And friends, our scripture lesson today is taken from Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 8, verses 12 through 25. So then, brothers and sisters, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if in fact we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Well, friends, we are in week 6 of our series as we're going through this large portion of Paul's letter to the Romans, which is the longest letter in the New Testament. And for the last few weeks, we've been talking about Paul's discussion of what it means to be able to become righteous. In other words, he's been using this metaphor of slavery and saying that we had been slaves to sin, and then we were freed from that in order to become slaves to righteousness. But then came the question of if we are indeed freed from the slavery to sin and becoming slaves to righteousness, why is it that we struggle so hard to do what is right, and how is it that we can persevere in that struggle? So we've been talking about that struggle toward righteousness in our lives over the past couple of weeks. And last week we talked about the importance of vision. We talked about the importance of being able to consider that things that seem hard to do, that things that seem like they go against our human ability, should not be limitations to what we strive for, that we shouldn't be stymied by the seeming impracticality of becoming better, because sometimes we give up too easily, but rather we are seeking to rise above human nature. We're seeking to arise above what it was we were, and we do that by the power of God. But when it gets hard, and when we're struggling, and when it's difficult to see what those possibilities are, how is it that we continue to move forward? That's what we're going to talk about today. Now, as we've been going through this pandemic, which has lasted, a lot longer than I thought that it ever would, one of my concerns at the beginning was that, what if I run out of things to watch online? So maybe some of you have been looking for things to watch, and some of you, I think, have gone back to look at classic things that you might have missed along the way. And one of the classic movies, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to do so, is from 60 years ago. In fact, it happened to be released precisely 1 year to the day before I was born, and that movie was Ben-Hur. And Ben-Hur starring Charlton Heston. It ended up winning Best Picture that year. Now, it's a pretty long movie, so if you set out now to watch it, the pandemic might be over by the time you finish. It's nearly 4 hours long. And it has a wonderful, iconic chariot race in it. There's a funny story about it. That's a picture of Charlton Heston driving his 4-horse chariot, is that he was actually driving the chariot himself, but he was concerned about how well he was doing. He was so focused on actually driving the chariot that he was not really acting. And the director yelled at him that if he would simply stay in the chariot, the director would guarantee that he would win the race. And so just a funny little aside about that. But there's a subplot in the movie which seems a little foreign to us. And so his character falls into slavery, but then through some things that happen, he's adopted by a wealthy Roman, by a powerful Roman. But he's adopted as a fully grown man, as an adult. And we don't see that many adult adoptions here in the United States, but it was actually not an uncommon practice in Rome. It allowed persons to have an heir, for instance, if there was no natural heir. And so you could adopt an adult. And so this process of adopting an adult was something that was known to the people at the time, and Paul uses this social construct in talking about what happens to us in faith. Because one of the things that Paul says is that we did not receive a spirit of slavery, but rather we received a spirit of adoption. So he's using this idea of being adopted at whatever age we are, not just as children as we're used to, but no matter what age it is that you come to faith, no matter what age it is that you bring Christ into your life, you have become adopted, and that is how you become a child of God. Now, the thing about this is that in Roman law that Paul's listeners would have understood, that act of being adopted made you entirely a new person. It didn't just bring you into your new family. It wiped out your previous identity. You were so absolutely new that even the debts that you owed as your former self were wiped out because that person didn't exist anymore. And so you were an absolutely new person. And that's one of the things that Paul is trying to impress upon us, that as we move forward in faith, as we come to faith in Christ, God is offering a fresh start, and God never stops offering that fresh start. And I'm wondering if in this time you've perhaps even taken some advantage of the opportunity that this gives you to think about ways in which your life could have a fresh start. I mean, in this time, churches, businesses of all kinds are thinking about ways in which they can reconfigure themselves and have a fresh start in adapting to this time and in adapting to the world that's going to come later. Offices, the way offices are structured, are adapting, and it's going to be really a fresh start on the other side of this. And maybe even the way you relate to one another in your families is having a fresh start. Maybe there are some fresh new traditions that are coming out of this that you're going to maintain. And even if you've not done it yet, as we continue in this time, that opportunity is there, and even beyond it, the opportunity continues to be there because God never stops offering us the possibility of having a fresh start. Now, Paul takes that idea of a fresh start and moves toward a more traditional understanding of how we get started in life, and that's getting started as children, right? So he says that all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God, and Paul then adjusts this metaphor from being adopted into a family to becoming children the way we start as children, which is through the process of being birthed. And so in that process of being birthed, we understand that it's not an easy process. And so he draws on the image of labor pains, and he says that we know the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains. And he chooses labor pains because labor pains are such an interesting thing. Now, of course, that's easy for me to say as a guy, right? So I'm a guy, I've not been married, I've not had kids, and so what do I know about labor pains? So forgive me, anyone who's skeptical about me talking about it, but I'm just using Paul's descriptive language as best I can. And the thing about labor pains is that it's something that represents pain with a purpose. It represents pain that moves us toward an important end. And the thing about that purpose is that purpose is also pretty nonspecific, because we don't know what the outcome is going to be of that life that comes into being, right? And so this life comes into being through this process of pain, and yet we have no idea how that's going to play out. But what we do know is that in that moment is all of this possibility. That in that moment is all of the openness, the newness of what might be, and that the what might be makes the pain worth it. You see, the struggle is simply what we have to go through to get to the point where the newness is possible. You know, the possibility is enough. The possibility is a big enough motivator. We don't need to know what's going to happen. We don't need to know what the child is going to do. We don't need to know what the outcome is going to be. But the possibilities that exist are enough to make the struggle worth it. And for us, in our lives, as we're in the midst of our lives, the possibility of the newness, the possibility of what might lie ahead of us is enough for us to persevere through the struggle to escape that which had been, to escape the old. We have to escape the old to get to the place where the new might happen. You see, one of the things that Paul says is that the possibility really is enough for us. You see, Paul writes this. He says, you know, if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. What matters is that the hope is there. You know, he says that, you know, hope that is seen is not hope. In other words, hope that is seen is not hope. What he means by that is that, you know, if you can see it, if you touch it, if you know what it is, then it's not really hope. It's because it's just so tangible. But rather, hope is something that lies beyond the predictable. Now, the predictable helps. The predictable certainly helps. For instance, I have a friend who loves to watch sunrises. And in order to do that, that takes a bit of planning and preparation because it's so early. A friend who likes to watch sunrises like at the beach, okay? And if you have to do that, then what you need to do is you need to go to bed a little early, wake up really, really early, get in your car, drive to a place where you can see the sunrise well, and get there ahead of time so that you are ready to see the sunrise when it happens. And that's wonderful. It's wonderful, but it's based on the predictable, right? You understand that it's going to happen, and that's your motivation. But one of my questions is, would you go without knowing? Would you go without knowing exactly what it was going to be, but simply having been promised that it was going to be worth it? Is the promise enough to get you to move? Because sometimes we don't understand how beautiful it's going to be until after we've seen it. But if we aren't in position to see it, we're not going to be able to see it. You know, you can tell me how beautiful a sunrise is over the ocean, but the very first time, I have to take your word for it, right? Because if I've not seen it, and I don't believe in it because I've not seen it, then I won't do the work that it takes to be able to see it. And if I don't do the work that it takes to be able to see it, then I won't see it and I'll never know. That first time, you have to take it on faith. But when you do and you go through the journey, sometimes on the other side of it, all right, you understand how magnificent it is. One of my favorite authors is Anne Lamott, and I like to quote her reasonably frequently, and I really recommend her books to you. And one quote that I love of hers is when she says she was talking to a friend of hers who's a priest, and she asked the priest if he believed in miracles. And this was the priest's answer to Anne as she reports it. She reports that what the priest said to her was that all I needed to do was to remember what my life used to be like and what it's like now. And the priest went on to say that she should call herself Exhibit A on the case for miracles. Because she had had such a difficult life, came to faith, turned her life around, and it has become something totally different than what it had been. But she was able to see the miracle, okay, after the fact. And that's one of the things that I think is kind of interesting, is that sometimes maybe we lose sight of the miracles that our lives are becoming in this time. I mean, think again about birth that we've been talking about. So often we see that little baby and we talk about the miracle of life, right? We talk about the miracle of life at birth. But I think there's so many more miracles yet to come. There's so many more miracles yet to come as we see what we're able to do, as we see what we're able to accomplish, as we see the things that we experience as we move through life. I mean, I look at my life and a big part of me thinks that my whole life has been a sequence of miracles. And I think that what's to come in my life is a miracle. Because I think what's to come in my life is going to surprise me with its wonder. It's going to surprise me with its joy, all right? Even though I don't know exactly what it's going to be. But that's the thing about miracles. Miracles never announce themselves in advance, all right? That's why they're miracles. No one expects them, all right? Miracles only become known after they happen. God works through the unexpected. But God works through the unexpected in a good way. I know all of you have heard that saying, right? That we should always expect the unexpected. But so sadly, we interpret that as bad. Expect the unexpected. Yes, you should expect that your water heater is going to explode, or you should expect that your roof is going to leak. Expect the unexpected. But no, what about expecting the unexpected and having it be good? And I got to tell you, if we're going to, if I can speak a little personally here, that's one of the struggles in my life. One of the struggles in my life has been to expect that maybe the unexpected will be good. That's one of my points of growth. That's one of my points of healing. One of my points of moving forward in life is to learn that sometimes the unexpected is unexpectedly wonderful. But growing into that is one of the things that fills me with hope. And that hope is now something that I come to expect, and that's what hope is. When Paul uses the word hope in the New Testament, the Greek word for that is this word elpis. All right? And elpis means expectation. It's not wishing. Hope is not having a preset outcome that you envision and wondering if that's going to come to be. Okay? It's not that's wishing. Rather, hope is the expectation of things that will be good even when they are uncertain. It's the certainty of an unknown good rather than uncertainty of a known good. And when we have that certainty of the unknown good, it allows us to continue to work through the struggle even when we can't see exactly what we're struggling toward. It allows us to work through the struggle. It allows us to endure the pain even when we're not sure what the ultimate outcome is going to be. It allows us to work past the setbacks that we have along the way because we're working toward what lies beyond, with the expectation that when we get to what lies beyond, we will see the miracle that had happened along the way. Now, why should you expect that what's to come is going to be good? Where does that hope come from? Where does that confidence come from? That is going to be the topic next week as we move on to the 7th and final week of our series as we move through this part of Paul's letter to the Romans. So we hope that you'll tune in next week for part 7 of, wow, that's a long letter. Amen.